My dad died and I'm scared my family won't get along. So yesterday after my dad comes home he eats what my mom made for him. Eggs and spam. To be clear, he has a pre-existing medical history of high blood pressure and gout. First found out when he was admitted to the hospital in 2015 when he fell ill, and we basically had to force him to go to the hospital BC he didn't want to go. He was put on medication since, with changes to them maybe a year or so ago. So back to when after he ate. My half-sister heard a thud around 740-ish and told me to check BC. She thought maybe my parents are arguing. I go down and see my dad on the kitchen floor my mom behind him a few feet away and I hear him snoring. I ask my mom a question, get worried, run back upstairs and knock on my sister's door. She calls my other sister and also tells me to stop wasting time, call 911. I was scared and frantic. I wish I called 911 or saw him when he came in so I could maybe have called sooner. They get frantic too and we all start yelling at each other and I try to maintain order also as I'm talking to 911 person. At some point in all of this my brother-in-law yells for help and I help him turn my dad onto his side. BC he said he could choke on his saliva. My dad stops snoring and we start panicking. The EMS tells us how to perform CPR but my sisters keep yelling and so I try to get them working together. They finally start working on it. One is doing compression and the other giving him air and sometimes rotating. Fire department and ambulance gets here and they start doing the same thing but also have defibrillators and honestly, I'm just in shock still. It was maybe 8:03 p.m. when they came or so, I don't remember, it's all a blur. I checked my phone for timestamp, but I called twice so I forgot when original call was placed. They called it at 8:50 p.m. and I just began to lose it. My aunt comes and my sister is trying to call my dad's work to let his bosses know. We talk about how we want my dad's arrangements and agree on cremation. BC we don't have the money for anything else but also my sister wants the remains. My mom is bipolar schizophrenic and my sisters and bro-in-law don't get along. Her because of a whole history that would keep you here forever if I tried to type it. My dad was a bad person but he still chose us and tried his best to provide regardless of his fallacies. He had my mom's back too, saying he wouldn't kick her out or place her in a mental home. My sisters kinda want that, I think, but I'm scared to talk about it. My mom is okay sometimes but also acts up BC of her mental illness sometimes, and my dad and I were her constants regardless of what happened. My mom is old and still wants to benefit from some social security services that my dad had, but my sisters and I think we should get a majority control of his account. There's a lot of renovations to be done. BC he ignored upkeep of the house for a number of years, example, the roof. My mom is not very sad about the ordeal. BC she had a long history of mental abuse from my dad and I understand, but we for some reason stayed together. It how to move forward except for one moment at a time and I'm still waiting for funeral home to come pick up his body. It's 8:13 a.m. now, been waiting since night before. And I have been crying but also I can't sleep and I'm sorry if this doesn't meet guidelines. I just need to vent even though I told a few friends. I'm still in disbelief. How this will moving forward. I believe it can though. But it's hard to stay positive. About a week after my post I planted a wall of blackberries and raspberries at the two sides of my garden facing the driveway. About 30 centimeters from the edge so no overhanging branches. On the other side of the berry wall I planted lots stuff like strawberries and tomatoes. To reach the tomatoes and strawberries from the driveway you have either go through the fruit bushes or walk up to my house. Walk about 2 m along the side of the house and my windows and then walk into my actual garden. Not something you do by mistake. For about 2 weeks it was somewhat quiet but I still found the kids on my driveway every single days. As far as I know they did not enter the garden and I hadn't noticed them walking around my house anymore. So I figured the bushes were working. About 1 week ago berry season started and my bushes are now full of raspberries and there's lots of strawberries as well. The neighbors noticed. First I caught the boys picking and eating raspberries so I told them off and dropped them off at home, told their mom I caught them stealing. That's how I see it even though it's fruit, and that I'd call the cops next time. She huffed and told me to grow up, but took the boys inside anyway. After that it was quiet up until yesterday afternoon, when I went out for a while and found the dad and his 2 sons right in the middle of my garden when I returned, clearing my bushes and plants. I didn't even confront them. just called the cops from a distance as they hadn't noticed me yet and started filming them after making the call. Luckily 2 cops showed up after 10 minutes or so and they confronted the neighbor as they were still picking berries. They told them they were trespassing and that the berry picking was in fact considered stealing and that I could press charges. For the first time I noticed a bit of fear in my neighbor. He was having trouble finding his words and kept looking back at his house. I guess hoping his wife would show to yell at the cops. They all went inside with the cops, so I just went home as well. After a while the cops came by and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I asked them if they felt like they scared the neighbor enough to stay away. I got a small smile and yes, about him, but the wife had just kept shouting at them and her husband about the little. Living next door. I told them no for now, asked them if I'd be allowed to get an extra camera set up on the wall between my garden and the road, to cover the entire front garden plus driveway. They said that's allowed as long as it's on my side of the wall. So, now I'm getting an extra camera installed. One neighbor knows I'm done messing around but his wife isn't there yet, and if I ever catch any of them again, the cops will be called and possible charges will follow. I am 20 female, have recently moved out of my mother's house for college. I enrolled in scholarship. The other night, my mother wanted her, my younger brother, and I to have dinner together. It's been a while since we've spoken, and I'm afraid this might happen again. We were having a nice night, the dinner was delicious, and honestly, we were all having a good time. Eventually, we got onto the topic of how things were when I was younger. I made the comment on how her behavior when I was younger made me feel like I missed out on a lot of things as a child. She disagrees, and tells me that I'm being dramatic, and that my childhood was perfect. Quote, I was lucky to have a mom who cared as much as she did. My mother gave birth to me when she was 18. My father walked out when I was young, due to a personal conflict between the two. So, she raised me on her own until I was 7. She met a guy, and they ended up having a kid together, my younger brother. He was a golden child to my mom. His father was only a temporary item, as he left as well, soon after. Although the father of my brother was still visible in his life, I didn't have anyone to look up to as a father figure. Eventually, my mom went through a phase of depression after they separated. She started to care less and less about her children, and more about her parties and men she wanted to sleep with. It ended up getting so bad that by the time I was 10, I was a full-time caretaker of my younger brother. With the exceptions of the weekends he was with his father. I started to cook, clean, do everyone's laundry, and take care of everything outside of the boundaries of my home. From ages 13 to 15 I began missing out and losing good friends because I wasn't able to participate in any activity related to anyone else. I didn't get a car or a phone until I was 18, and even then I wasn't allowed to leave my house. I graduated senior year with flying colors and ended up getting a scholarship to a really good college. I took this opportunity not only to focus on myself, but to also help my mother realize that I was not going to be around forever. When she found out I got the scholarship, she threw a fit and told me I wasn't allowed to leave my responsibilities here at home. I left a week after the conversation. I did make sure that my younger brother was safe with his second guardian at the time. My mother and I talked on some occasions but never really kept contact. We got together, and you know the story. She told me I am an asshole for saying that she never really took care of me or my younger brother. I told her that eventually, she will need to get help and stop victimizing herself. But I'm starting to feel guilty, and that maybe I was dramatic after all. I've officially decided that I no longer need my mother in my life at this point in time. I'm now going to only focus on myself, and working towards a successful career in law. Of course, my mom won't take it well, but it won't really matter to her in the long run. Her children never really mattered to her. I'm going to stay in contact with my younger brother, though. I'm going to make sure that he doesn't possibly go through the same amount of trauma I did. I have always been civil with my half-brother. We were close as kids, but he started to have an attitude at 13 and pretty much stopped being nice, and started messing with my things / making fun of me and doing pranks to annoy me / privacy, was gone with him coming into my room and taking my things. Whenever I complained, my stepmom would normalize his behavior and make excuses. My dad never really grounded him and thought that talking to him will get him to behave better. I'm currently in college. I live in a rented apartment and have car to help me get to the university or other places. The car isn't expensive or fancy at all. I saved up for it 2 years ago. I decided to have Christmas dinner with my family. It's the perfect opportunity to be with family since I haven't seen my dad in a while. I arrived at my dad's house and left my purse and my keys on the kitchen island after my stepmom told me to help with dinner. My half-brother started talking about my car in the kitchen while my stepmom was listening and asked if he could take it for a couple of hours to hang out with friends. I politely told him no. He threw a fit and brought up how I needed to relax and not worry, but my answer was still the same. While we were sitting at the dinner table, my half-brother got up, washed his hands, and I thought he went outside. I got busy talking to my dad, and after I got up to wash my hands, I noticed my car keys weren't there. I went outside to ask him, and neither he nor my car were there. I lost it. I started calling his phone, but he hung up on me several times. I was furious. I told my dad I'd call the police if he didn't come back with the car. My stepmom jumped to defend him and said I was being unreasonable to call the police. I called him one last time, then I called the police. My stepmom freaked out when my half-brother got picked up by the police. She told me to go explain the situation to the authorities, otherwise he'd spend the night in jail. But I refused, especially since I still hadn't got my car back. Stepmom yelled that I ruined dinner and that it was no big deal. He was going to return it after borrowing it from me, but he didn't really borrow it, and she heard me say no. I don't know what she told the police, but I didn't give permission to use the car. My stepmom's side of family are mad at me for doing this to my brother and hinted that I don't consider him family. My dad's side of family sided with me, saying he deserved it. My dad said I overreacted and I shouldn't have called the police when he disappeared for 4 hours. I talked to the police about what happened, and I learned later that my stepmom said that her son was allowed to borrow it, and that it was a misunderstanding. I wasn't going to let her continue to lie, but my dad told me to back off and let it go. This really upset me. My half-brother wasn't even berated the way I was by the family.